The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, the kind of silence that falls over the sky before a superstorm. But every seat was full, with the air thick with anticipation, and all eyes were fixed on the woman at the heart of it all. Former Sergeant Emma Larson sat on the edge of her chair, but all her strength was concentrated on the cane in one hand, and her other hand tightly gripping the leather leash of the dog beside her, Max, a Belgian Malinois with a calm yet watchful demeanor to everyone else. To the onlookers, Max was just another military working dog, but to Emma, he was everything. A partner, a savior, a reason to keep fighting. Before you continue with the story, where in the world are you listening? Subscribe to the channel to see what happens next. Emma's grip tightened on Max's leash as the judge cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Sergeant Larson," he began, his tone measured but firm. "This may be your final opportunity to make your case. The Army has decided that Max is to be reassigned to a new training program. Do you have anything to say?" Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat echoing the weight of the moment. Reassigned. The word felt like a betrayal, a cold dismissal of the years she and Max had spent together, diffusing bombs in dusty war zones, dodging death with every step. Max wasn't just a tool to her. He'd pulled her from the wreckage of an explosion, stayed by her side through sleepless nights haunted by memories, and given her purpose when the world felt like it was crumbling. Losing him now was unthinkable. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke, but her words carried a quiet strength. "Your Honor," she said, her eyes never leaving the judge. "Max isn't just a military asset. He's saved my life more times than I can count, sniffing out IEDs, warning me of ambushes, even dragging me to safety when I couldn't walk. When I came home, broken and lost, he was the one who kept me grounded. Please, don't take him away from me." The room was silent, the weight of her plea hanging in the air. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably, their eyes softening with empathy. Others whispered quietly, their murmurs barely audible but charged with emotion. The judge's expression remained unreadable, his fingers tapping lightly on the gavel as he considered her words. For a moment, it seemed he might respond, his lips parting as if to deliver a ruling. But before he could speak, Max moved. With a sudden jerk, he yanked the leash from Emma's hand, his body tensing as he let out a sharp, urgent bark that echoed through the courtroom. Heads turned, gasps rippled through the crowd, and the bailiffs instinctively stepped forward, their hands hovering near their belts. Max's ears were pinned back, his gaze locked on a man seated among the witnesses. A military contractor in a crisp suit, his face calm, but his posture rigid. "Max!" Emma called, her voice cracking with alarm, but deep down, she knew this wasn't random. She'd seen this behavior before, countless times in the field. Max's barks weren't just noise, they were a warning. Her pulse quickened as she leaned on her cane, her eyes darting between her dog and the man he was fixated on. "Your Honor," she said, her tone urgent now. "He's not just barking. Max only does this when he senses something dangerous, a bomb, a threat, something. He's trying to tell us." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his hand. The contractor shifted slightly in his seat, his calm facade flickering for just a moment. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, a nervous energy spreading like wildfire. Whatever Max had detected, it wasn't just about Emma's fight to keep him. Something was wrong, something no one else had noticed, and Max was determined to make them see it. The courtroom seemed to shrink under the weight of Max's relentless barking, each sharp sound slicing through the air like a warning shot. The Belgian Malinois stood rigid, his muscles taut, eyes locked on the military contractor seated among the witnesses. His growls deepened, a low, guttural rumble that sent a chill racing through the room. Emma gripped her cane tightly, her knuckles whitening as she watched Max's every move. She knew that look, that stance. Countless times in the field, it had meant the difference between life and death. This wasn't just instinct. Max was certain of something. "Sergeant Larson," the judge snapped, his voice tinged with irritation as he leaned forward. "Control your dog, or I'll have him removed." The gavel hovered in his hand, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, darting toward the contractor who sat unnervingly still. Emma's heart pounded as she took a shaky step forward, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "Your Honor, please," she said, her tone steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Max isn't acting out. He's trained to detect threats, explosives, chemicals, danger. If he's barking like this, there's something here we're not seeing. We need to listen to him." The room fell silent for a split second, her words sinking in like stones dropped into still water. The contractor shifted slightly, his hands folding calmly in his lap, but Emma caught the brief tightening of his jaw. The spectators exchanged nervous glances, their earlier sympathy for Emma now tinged with a creeping dread. The bailiffs hesitated, their hands still near their belts, unsure whether to approach Max or the man he was fixated on. Then, without warning, Max stopped barking. The sudden silence was deafening, heavier than the noise that had preceded it. His body went completely still, ears perked, head snapping toward the double doors at the far end of the courtroom. A low, menacing growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating through the air like a distant storm. Every eye followed his gaze, the tension coiling tighter with each passing second. Emma's breath hitched as she leaned forward, her cane digging into the floor for balance. She'd seen this before, Max locking onto a threat no one else could sense, moments before disaster struck. "Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you see?" The judge's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering onto the bench. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice cracking as he glanced at the bailiffs. "Check those doors. Now." The larger bailiff, a man with a weathered face and cautious eyes, moved toward the doors, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. His partner followed, slower, his flashlight drawn as if expecting to find something lurking in the shadows beyond. Max's growl grew louder, his body straining against the leash, claws scraping against the polished floor. The crowd's murmurs turned to panicked whispers, some clutching their belongings, others inching toward the aisles. "Max, easy," Emma called, her voice firm but laced with fear. She knew better than to pull him back. Whatever he'd sensed, it was real, and it was close. Her eyes flicked to the contractor, who was now leaning forward slightly, his calm facade slipping as his gaze darted toward the doors. The bailiff reached the heavy wooden doors, his hand closing around the handle. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by Max's deep, relentless growl. As the handle turned, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. At first, it appeared empty, just a stretch of tiled floor and flickering lights. But Max's barking erupted again, sharp and frantic, his body lunging forward so fiercely that Emma nearly lost her grip. The bailiff froze, his flashlight beam sweeping the hallway. His voice, tight with alarm, broke the silence. "There's something out here," he said, his words barely audible but heavy with dread. He took a step forward, then stopped, his face paling as he turned back to the courtroom. It's not right. The courtroom felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos, Max's ferocious barking filling the space like a siren no one could ignore. The Belgian Malinois strained against his leash, his claws scraping the floor, his eyes locked on the dark hallway beyond the open doors. Every muscle in his body was taut, his growls shifting into sharp, urgent barks that sent a shiver through the crowd. Emma steadied herself with her cane, her heart racing as she followed Max's gaze. She'd trusted his instincts in war zones where a single misstep meant death. She wasn't about to doubt him now. The larger bailiff stood frozen in the hallway, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept the shadows. His partner hovered behind him, weapon drawn, his face pale with uncertainty. "I don't see anything," the larger bailiff muttered, but his voice wavered, betraying the unease that gripped him. "It's just too quiet." Emma's chest tightened. Too quiet. She'd heard those words before, in dusty villages and bombed-out streets, moments before Max had uncovered a hidden explosive or signaled an ambush. Her eyes flicked to the military contractor seated among the witnesses, his hand still lingering inside his jacket pocket. His calm demeanor was cracking, a bead of sweat glistening on his temple despite the cool air. "Max isn't wrong," Emma said, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs of the crowd. She raised her head, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, he's trained to sense things we can't. Bombs, chemicals, threats. If he's acting like this, we need to clear the room. Now." The judge's knuckles whitened around his gavel, his earlier authority replaced by a flicker of fear. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a sharp metallic clank echoed from the hallway, distinct, deliberate, like something heavy hitting the floor. Gasps erupted from the spectators, chairs scraping as people instinctively pulled back. Max lunged forward, barking so fiercely that Emma had to brace herself against her cane to hold him. "What the hell was that?" The smaller bailiff stammered, his flashlight jerking wildly as he stepped back. The larger bailiff tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice echoing into the darkness. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. He stepped into the dim light of the hallway with a slow, unnerving calm. A man in a tailored coat, his face partially obscured by the brim of a cap. His hands were buried in his pockets, his posture relaxed, almost amused, as if the chaos around him was nothing more than a game. Behind him, the faint outline of another figure lingered, barely visible, but radiating menace. Max's barking reached a fever pitch, his teeth bared as he strained against the leash with unrelenting force. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her instincts screaming that this man wasn't just a bystander. There was something wrong about him, something cold, calculated, dangerous. "Who are you?" the larger bailiff demanded, his gun snapping up to aim at the stranger. The man tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk curling his lips, as he took another step forward, unfazed by the weapon trained on him. "Relax," he said, his voice smooth and chillingly confident, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm not here to cause trouble." His eyes slid past the bailiff, locking onto Max with an intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. "I'm here for the dog." Emma's heart stopped. Her grip on the leash tightened, her voice rising with a mix of fury and fear. "You're not taking him," she said, her words sharp and unyielding. "Max is mine, my partner, my family. I don't care who you are or what you want. You're not touching him." The man's smirk widened, his gaze shifting to Emma for the first time. "Oh, Sergeant Larson," he said, his tone almost mocking. "You don't understand. That dog isn't just special to you. He's valuable. More than you know." He took another step forward, his hand emerging from his pocket to reveal a small metallic device, sleek, unassuming, but unmistakably dangerous. The bailiffs shouted in unison, "Drop it!" But the man didn't flinch. Max's growls turned feral, his body coiling as if ready to spring. The crowd's panic swelled, voices rising in confusion and fear. Emma's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. Whatever this man wanted with Max, it wasn't just about his training. There was something bigger at play. Something Max had sensed from the moment that contractor shifted in his seat. And as the stranger's thumb hovered over the device in his hand, Emma knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a fight for Max anymore. It was a fight for everyone in the room. The courtroom was a powder keg, every sound amplified in the suffocating tension. Max's feral growls, the creak of chairs as spectators shrank back, the sharp intake of breath from the bailiffs. The stranger stood just inside the hallway's dim light, his smirk unwavering, the sleek metallic device glinting in his hand. Max lunged against his leash, barking with such ferocity that Emma's arms strained to hold him, her cane wobbling under her weight. Her eyes were locked on the stranger, her pulse hammering as she registered the cold certainty in his gaze. Whatever that device was, it wasn't harmless, and Max knew it. "Drop it now," the larger bailiff shouted again, his gun steady, but his voice tight with fear. His partner flanked him, flashlight beam shaking as it illuminated the stranger's calm figure. The second figure in the shadows lingered, silent but ominous, their presence a weight pressing down on the room. The judge slammed his gavel, the sound swallowed by the chaos. "Enough," he bellowed, his face flushed with a mix of anger and panic. "Identify yourself, or I'll have you arrested." The stranger tilted his head, his smirk deepening as if the judge's words were a mild amusement. "Arrest me?" he said, his voice low and laced with mockery. "You don't even know what's at stake here." His eyes flicked back to Max, then to Emma, a glint of calculation in them. "That dog. He's not just a pet, Sergeant. He's a key, and I'm not leaving without him." Emma's blood ran cold. A key? Her mind raced, memories flashing of Max sniffing out bombs buried deep in desert sand, his nose catching traces no machine could match. He wasn't just trained, he was exceptional, his instincts sharper than any soldier she'd ever known. But a key to what? She tightened her grip on the leash, stepping forward despite the ache in her leg. "You're not taking him," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Max stays with me. Whatever you're planning, you'll have to go through us both." The stranger's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing as he studied her resolve. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he raised the device, his thumb brushing the surface. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his tone chillingly calm. "He's not yours anymore. He belongs to us." Before anyone could react, Max erupted into a frenzy, his barks louder, more desperate, as he yanked the leash so hard Emma nearly fell. The crowd gasped, some scrambling toward the exits, their whispers turning to shouts. The bailiffs tensed, shouting commands, but the stranger didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed something on the device. A faint click echoed, sharp and ominous. The lights in the courtroom flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. Screams filled the void, chairs toppling as panic surged. When the lights sputtered back on, the stranger was no longer alone. Two more figures had stepped from the hallway, their faces obscured by hoods, each holding something metallic. Compact, deadly, unmistakable. Not guns, but something worse. Their purpose unclear, but their threat undeniable. Emma's heart pounded as she steadied herself, Max's growls vibrating through her like a lifeline. The military contractor among the witnesses was on his feet now, his calm facade gone, his eyes darting between the stranger and the new figures. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice low but audible, a crack in his composure that confirmed Emma's suspicions. He was part of this, whatever this was. "Max, stay," Emma whispered, her voice trembling but firm, though she knew he was already locked onto the threat. The stranger took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the dog. "Last chance, Sergeant," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Hand him over, or this room learns what happens when you defy us." The bailiffs shouted again, weapons raised, but the strangers didn't budge, their confidence unnerving. The judge was shouting for order, his voice drowned by the chaos. Emma's eyes met Max's, his sharp gaze steady despite the frenzy, and in that moment, She knew. This wasn't just about saving him anymore. Whatever these people wanted, Max had sensed it from the start, and it was bigger than anyone in the room could imagine. As the stranger's hand tightened around the device, Emma braced herself, her resolve hardening like steel. She and Max had faced death before. They could face it again. Together. The courtroom was a storm of chaos, teetering on the brink of collapse. Max's snarls echoed like thunder, his body coiled and ready to strike, every bark a warning that pierced the air. The three strangers stood at the edge of the hallway, their metallic devices glinting ominously under the flickering lights, their hooded figures casting long, menacing shadows. Emma gripped Max's leash with both hands, her cane pressed against the floor for balance, her heart pounding as she faced the leader, the man with the smirk, whose cold eyes never wavered from her dog. The crowd was in disarray, some frozen in fear, others shoving toward the exits, their shouts blending into a cacophony of panic. "Everybody stay where you are!" The larger bailiff bellowed, his gun trained on the leader, but his voice trembled, betraying the uncertainty gripping him. His partner flanked him, weapon raised, flashlight beam darting nervously between the strangers. The military contractor among the witnesses was now standing, his face pale, his earlier composure shattered as he muttered something under his breath, his eyes locked on the leader. The judge hammered his gavel, the sound barely registering amidst the noise. "This is a court of law," he shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You will stand down, or I'll have this room cleared." The leader chuckled, a low, chilling sound that cut through the chaos like a blade. "Cleared?" he said, his smirk widening as he took a slow step forward, ignoring the bailiff's weapons. "You think this is about your rules?" His gaze shifted to Max, his eyes glinting with something predatory. "That dog is worth more than every life in this room. He's not just a tool, he's a weapon, and I'm taking him." Emma's blood boiled, her fear giving way to a surge of defiance. She stepped forward, her cane clicking against the floor, her voice ringing out despite the tremor in her chest. "Max isn't a weapon," she said, her words sharp and unyielding. "He's my partner. He saved me when no one else could, and I'll die before I let you touch him." She tightened her grip on the leash, feeling Max's strength anchoring her, his growls a steady reminder of their bond. The leader's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Brave words, Sergeant," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But you're out of your depth. You have no idea what he's capable of, or what we're building." He raised the device in his hand, his thumb hovering over it again, and Max's barking grew frantic, his body straining so hard the leash creaked under the pressure. "Drop it," the smaller bailiff shouted, his voice cracking as he took a step closer. The two hooded figures behind the leader shifted, their own devices catching the light, their silence more unnerving than any threat. The contractor in the crowd took a step back, his hands raised as if distancing himself, but Emma caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew these men. "Max, hold," Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos, her trust in him absolute. She scanned the room, her mind racing for a way out. She'd faced worse odds in war zones, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting the one being who'd never let her down. Then Max moved. With a sudden, powerful lunge, he yanked the leash free from Emma's grip, charging toward the leader. The crowd screamed, the bailiffs shouting as they tried to react, but Max was faster. He didn't attack. He stopped short, planting himself between Emma and the strangers, his teeth bared, his growl so deep it seemed to shake the floor. The leader froze, his thumb hesitating over the device, his smirk replaced by a flash of uncertainty. Emma seized the moment, her voice rising above the chaos. "He knows you're lying," she shouted, pointing at the leader. "Max can smell it. Whatever you're hiding, whatever that thing is, he's onto you. Back off, or he'll make you regret it." The leader's eyes darted to Max, then to Emma, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. The bailiffs edged closer, their weapons steady now, emboldened by Max's stand. The crowd's panic began to shift, murmurs of awe mixing with fear as they watched the dog hold his ground. Even the judge seemed to regain his nerve, his voice cutting through. "You've disrupted this court enough," he said, slamming his gavel. "Bailiffs, take these men into custody, now." The leader's jaw tightened, his hand lowering slightly, the device still clutched tightly. He glanced at his companions, then back at Max, his expression darkening. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You can't protect him forever, Sergeant. We'll be back, for him and for what he knows." With a sharp gesture, he signaled his companions, and the three began to retreat, stepping back into the hallway shadows with an eerie calm. Emma's heart pounded as she called Max back, her voice soft but firm. "Max, here." He returned to her side, his growls fading, but his eyes never leaving the doorway. The bailiffs hesitated, then lowered their weapons as the strangers disappeared, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint shuffle of the crowd settling back into their seats. The judge exhaled shakily, setting his gavel down. "This court is adjourned," he said, his voice weary, barely audible over the lingering tension. Spectators began to file out, their whispers buzzing with disbelief, but Emma stayed rooted in place, her hand resting on Max's head. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude and exhaustion. He leaned into her touch, his warmth steadying her racing heart. As the room emptied, Emma's thoughts churned. She didn't know who those men were or what they meant by Max being a key. But one thing was clear. They weren't done. The contractor had slipped out in the chaos, his role in this still a mystery. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than a courtroom battle. But for now, Max was still hers, his loyalty unshakable, and that was enough. Emma glanced down at him, a faint smile breaking through her tension. "We're not done yet, buddy," she murmured. "Whatever they want, we'll face it together." And as Max's sharp eyes met hers, she felt the strength of their bond, a force no one, not even those strangers, could ever break. Would you like to hear more stories about veteran dogs like Max? If so, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next Veteran Dog Stories.